taking place in justification is actually a legal declaration. You may have heard people use a little shortened phrase or an acronym. And they'll say, well, justification means just as if I never sinned. What's the problem with that? Well, he just spent 3 chapters pointing out you did sin. He's pointed out 3 chapters there that you are in sin. And unless God does anything, unless God intervenes, unless you are infused with the righteousness that not comes from you, but comes from Christ, then, again, you're headed for a really bad situation. Now, justification basically makes a legal declaration. We actually call it forensic declaration. Forensics has to do with judicial judgment or declaration. The New Testament shows us that in the act of justification, God makes a judicial declaration about a person's status before He makes His judgment. And what happens in justification, it's not pardon. It's an act whereby God declares a person to be just. Now, this is not a change in the sinner's character or a change in his nature. It's only a change in his status. But it carries ramifications that actually guarantee that other changes will follow. So it's a really rich term. And forensic degrees like this are really fairly common in everyday life. For example, when a man and a woman are married, they will stand before the minister, they'll recite their vows, and at the end of the ceremony, the minister will say this, or if you stand in front of me and I do that, I'll say, by the authority invested in me by the state of Florida, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Instantly, they are legally husband and wife. Whereas seconds before, they had been nothing more than an engaged couple. But now they're married. And nothing inside them actually changed when those words were spoken, but their status before God, their status before the law, their status before their family and before their friends had actually changed. And when the minister spoke those words, it was a legal declaration only. Even in a similar manner, when a jury foreman reads a verdict, the defendant is no longer the accused. Legally and officially, he instantly becomes either guilty or innocent, depending on the verdict. So nothing in his actual nature changes. But if he's found not guilty, he'll walk out of court as a free person in the eyes of the law, fully justified. So in biblical terms, justification is a divine verdict. And the divine verdict is this: not guilty, fully righteous. That's the divine verdict. When God saves you, that's what He does. He declares you righteous. So basically, it is a reversal of God's attitude toward the sinner. Because what was His attitude that we just studied? Wrath, judgment, condemnation. And now His attitude has changed toward the sinner. See, justification is more than simple pardon. Pardon alone would still leave the sinner without merit before God. And so when God justifies, what He actually does is He imputes divine righteousness to the sinner. And that's what we see in this section. As He imputes this, it's not your righteousness. He says right there, verse 22, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ. It's Christ's own infinite merit that becomes the grounds on which the believer stands before God. So what is taking place here, justification, is elevating the believer to a realm of full acceptance and divine privilege in Jesus Christ. So, justification is the act by which God judicially declares a person to be righteous in His sight. Now, I want to read something to you. I found this very interesting, and if you'll bear with me, if you want to get a book that just is really good for this study, unfortunately it's about 700 pages, but it's a book written by R.C. Sproul on the book of Romans. These are actually studies from his messages in his church, and it really reads like a commentary. And really it's not priced that bad. I think you can get a copy of it for about $25. But here is what he writes, and I think it's very interesting because in what he says right here, he gives us a little bit of history of the debate on justification between Protestants and Catholics. It's just very rich in what he has to share right here. So listen to what he says. He writes, in the 16th century, both Roman Catholics and Protestants agreed that in the final analysis, the act of justification is something God does. And it is a judicial declaration. Both sides, Catholic and Protestant, agree that justification does not happen until God declares a person righteous. The issue then is now this: on what grounds does God make that declaration? Why would God look at us when he sees one who is dead in sins and trespasses and say, you are a just person, when manifestly we are not just people? The good news of the gospel is that God pronounces people just, astonishingly enough, while they are still sinners. That was the debate with Rome. Rome set forth their doctrine, and still does, that God will never declare a person just, get this, until that person actually, under divine scrutiny, is found to be just. Okay? Are you finding the key right there? Because that was a key statement. In the 6th session of the Council of Trent, in the middle of the 16th century, at the heart of the Counter-Reformation, the Roman Catholic Church defined her doctrine of justification, which has continued to echo through the centuries, declaring without equivocation that before God will ever declare a person just, righteousness must inhere in that person. He must be righteous already. And God must see that righteousness. What's the problem? Are you already seeing the problem? I mean, again, we go through the first 3 chapters of Romans, and what do we see? We don't see man righteous. In fact, when we get into the end of chapter 3, we go, wow, God is declaring us to be righteous, even though we're sinful. He throws out a verdict of not guilty when we are guilty, and he just told us that we were guilty. That's amazing. Well, he goes on to say, when God looks at us, he will not say that we are just until he sees that we are really just. And that's what Rome says. Rome teaches that we cannot be just without grace, that we will never become just without faith, and that we will never become just without the assistance of Christ. We need faith, we need grace, we need Jesus, we need the righteousness of Christ infused or poured into our soul, but you must cooperate with that grace to such a degree that we will in fact become righteous. And he says if we die with any impurity in our soul, thereby lacking complete righteousness, we will not go to heaven. If no mortal sin is present in our life, we will go to purgatory, which is the place of purging. The point of the purging is to get rid of the dross so that we will become completely pure. It may take 3 years or 3 million years. But the object of purgatory is to make us righteous so that we can be admitted into God's heaven. Now again, what's the problem with that? Well, look at verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Go back to the early part of chapter 3. Go to verse 10. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one. Their throat is an open grave. With their tongue they keep deceiving. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So what's the dilemma here? Every person is shut under sin. There is no person righteous. And when God looks at you, He doesn't declare you righteous on the fact that maybe you are righteous, because the fact is we're not righteous. We're sinful. We're wicked. Jeremiah said the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Jesus said out of the heart proceed what? Murders, thefts, adulteries, fornications. All these wicked things come from where? From our fallenness. From our sinful nature. David said, in sin did my mother conceive me. He wasn't talking about a sinful relationship that his mother had. No, he was talking about this fallenness, this Adamic nature which was passed on to every single person. And listen, the whole proof of the fact that we're sinful is by what follows sin. What is the wages of sin? Death. That right there is the greatest proof that we're all sinful. So before we venture away from just